What's up guys, Doug Polk here and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Now normally we cover topics like news or hands that happened or break them down on a strategy level, but today I wanted to actually teach you guys how to think like a professional poker player. And no, I don't mean by that how to steal $100 chips while your friends aren't looking or find a stake when you're scamming other backers. Although I'm thinking about it, and both of those things might come in handy for certain types of players. But no, that's not what we're going to be covering today. What I want to teach you guys is how to create a consistent thought process that allows you to succeed when you're playing the game. And whenever we look at the really good, top-notch, high-stakes pros, the people who have come from nothing to being some of the top players in the game today, they all have the same consistent way of thinking about poker. Now, obviously, they differ in the way that they view things or what they view to be important, and there are a lot of concepts at play. That's what gives people different styles. That's why you see different approaches to the game. But the idea that the idea of how they think, the way that they approach every spot, it's consistent, and it's that consistency that allows them to operate at a high level. The main examples I'm going to give today are going to be poker, but I do think a lot of these concepts apply to pretty much any strategy game. I mean, here's the thing. If you want to be the actual best at something, or you want to be one of the best at something, you can't waste time thinking in circles and not focusing on factors that aren't that important. You only get a set amount of time to make decisions, and you have to use that time in a valuable way in order to make the most money or to win the most games. Let me give you a good example. Think about who you talk poker with. I'm sure you have some people that you talk with that are better than you and some that you talk with that are worse than you. That's sort of the way that things go, right? Not everyone's going to be on an identical level. Now think about the way they tell you hands. A lot of weaker players will focus on an individual element because it's memorable, but they fail to use their time telling you the story in an efficient manner. Maybe they'll start a story like saying, for example, so this is the guy that I saw him 3-bet 10-7 suited in mid position, so I know he's loose, and he showed that down. It was kind of a crazy guy. So he raises and I 3-bet, and then he decides to call, and then taking a step. So in this analogy, we know that there was a player who played a hand too loose, right? But we don't know the blinds, we don't know the positions, we don't know a lot of the specifics of the hand. Instead, we wasted a bunch of time on some example which could be totally irrelevant to the story. And that's something that I see a lot of weaker players do. They pick on, they basically want to categorize players, put them in a box. What's this guy? Oh, this is a 10-7 suited guy. And then spend time putting him in the box rather than spending as much time on the hand as possible. Whereas I think people that are very good at poker, they'll have a solid, consistent, analytical approach to it, where they're primarily going to emphasize all of the details of the hand over maybe one hand that showed down before. Or maybe if a good player was saying the same story, they would say, this is a player that tends to play too many hands versus opens I've seen in the past. So anyway, and then they'll give the specifics. But they don't just try and put someone into a box of this guy can do anything because I saw one weird hand. In fact, when I started playing poker tournaments, it seemed like basically everyone wanted to tell me some crazy hand where someone did something weird and how they tried to counter it. And that's all well and good. There is some amount of wanting to counter opponent strategies. But you want to focus on your thought process. What's important? Try and get rid of the details that aren't and focus on the ones that are, because again, you're only going to get so much time to make a decision. Let's make those seconds count. When we look at any type of competition, sport, game, anything like that, there are three separate elements to succeeding at it. There's the preparation, right? The strategy you create beforehand, maybe if there are physical elements to the game, the amount of time and work you put in on your body, maybe the mental side of it as well to be able to think clearly. Basically everything that goes into the before playing the game. Then there's the real-time analysis, your ability to take the preparation and then combine it with information that is now present to come up with an answer to how you're supposed to respond. And then there's the execution, or the actual physical process of doing the thing that needs to happen in order for you to succeed. Luckily for us in games like poker or chess, the execution aspect isn't too tough. You essentially just have to move small objects into other places on the table. Not that hard. Because poker, compared to a lot of other games, is an incomplete information game, meaning your opponents don't know what you have or all the information available. There is, of course, the ability to not give off any tells they need to hone as well. But for all intents and purposes, basically poker is about preparation and real-time analysis. The preparation aspect of poker has gotten easier and easier by the year. In fact, think about what it would be like playing poker back in the 80s and the 90s when games were wild and crazy and they were Cowboys playing and you had to look a man in his eye and figure out if he was bluffing. You know, back then, if you wanted to get good at poker, you couldn't exactly bust open upswingpoker.com and get better. There wasn't Poker Tracker. There weren't people running sims. There wasn't any of this stuff to learn from. So you had to actually play and think about the game and come up with your own solutions, which is honestly kind of amazing. It's what made the game so beatable for some of the all-time greats like Stu Unger. But nowadays, preparation isn't like that. You're going to have to spend a lot of hours memorizing pre-flop ranges and the simulations to how you're supposed to play certain board textures and the strategies that expert players are using, and you're going to have to take that and make that your game. And while I think that's a lot less fun than the other options, it is at least something that's pretty easy to replicate. You can take those strategies and actually replicate them. And that's something why I've always tried to advocate to players to try and play a theory-based style over an exploitative one. Here's the thing. Let's say that there's some guy who's truly amazing at exploiting his opponents, right? I think of a player maybe like Phil Ivey comes to mind when we think of someone like that. Well, that's great that Phil Ivey can stare down Doug Polk and see that he's clearly bluffing in this hand, but that's not going to help you, mainly because Doug Polk doesn't play poker anymore. It's going to be hard to get a read. The point is, how are you supposed to take that knowledge and interpret it? Like, if someone looks nervous, does that mean they're strong or weak? If someone does something with their cards, someone holds their chips a certain way. You know, these are kinds of things that some players manage to get to the top with, right? Because they're just guessing and they happen to guess right a lot. Or maybe they're truly good at reading people and how they play. But that's not something that you, person that isn't like that, can replicate. No, you're going to have to use ranges and theory and good strategy, because if you do that and you play a correct strategy, you're eventually going to win. It might take you a little bit longer, but the results are going to be there. And now with the multitude of resources out there, training sites, free YouTube videos, so much information out there that you can learn from, all of this software, it's never been easier to become good at poker. It's just going to take a lot of hours of study and memorization, but that's just what you have to do in today's game. Okay, so we've thought about our strategy. We've got a good idea of what the basics are going to be sitting down at the table. Now the question is, how do we execute this? And what I always tried to do was have a very consistent and clear thought process as the action would go to me. It would go something like this. When I get dealt my hand, I would look at each player as they act. When it gets to me, I would visualize, what is my range going to be here? I'm already going to have a pretty good idea based on the action. If it's folded to me, I know my open frequency. It gets loose as it gets to the button. I can visualize what that range looks like. If somebody opens before it gets to me, I'm thinking, okay, now I'm going to play tighter. I'm in this position. I'm probably going to play X amount of hands. And I'm thinking about that range before I see my hole cards. That way I'm not biased by what my hole cards might tell me. Now, eventually, if you get good enough of this, you don't have to wait for your hole cards because you'll become so used to it. But I do think, especially when you're starting out, waiting until the action gets to you and having an idea of what your range looks like before looking, as long as you're not holding up the game, I think that's a great way of going about it because you're going to remove personal bias. So our thought process begins with, what is the first person who acted? What hands are they likely to open with? If that's the opener, then think about their range. If that's you, think about your range. And then we're going to start to slowly define these things. Now, once you've made your decision, the hand's going to start to get more complex. We look at each player. What did they do? What should that look like, right? Should this be 10% of hands? Should it be 15% of hands? These are differences that you should start to understand because it's going to affect how these ranges will interact with different board textures. Now, one thing that people get really locked down in this spot or end up too far away from in this spot is, what do I think that my opponent is going to do differently here? Or what does my opponent think of me? Or things like that. I just don't think that it's very effective to get down those thoughts or into that type of logic. It's much better just to have, what do I think is the correct strategy, and trying to execute that and thinking about what things should mean rather than what they might mean. Let me go back to the example we had earlier. So you know this is 10-7 suited guy. You can have anything. You can have 10-7 suited, right? But why waste time thinking about all of the different weird hands that he could have here when you could instead think, okay, so let's say, for example, I opened from the hijack. So I should have, like, let's just say 22% of holdings here. Okay, so I have 22% of hands. Now this guy is 3-betting me in the cutoff, right? What should a cutoff 3-bet frequency look like here? Well, based on my study, let's say I've determined it looks like it's 7 or 8% of hands. Okay, so the average player is supposed to have 7 or 8% of hands. I'm going to make his slightly wider because I do think that this player has shown a tendency to have at least one crazy bluff every now and then. Let's call it 8 or 9%, right? Again, not a huge jump, but a small one that'll help me adjust and play better against them. Now, in this situation, I've now visualized what my 22% of hands looks like. I'm kind of visualizing what his 3-bet range might look like, and the action gets back to me. Okay, so given the bet size my opponent used, what does my continue range look like? Again, we start off with bet size. What do we continue with? How would I alter that slightly based on my opponent and get to the answer? Notice how this thought process is going to be consistent throughout the hand. It's always, what's the bet size in front of me? What range do I continue with facing that? How do I want to construct that range? How do I balance out different elements of my strategy? And we keep doing that over and over again. Once you've completed that process, or you get near the end of that process, we can add in some adjustments to our opponent's tendencies. We do not start with my opponent's tendencies and then we just fly off the handle and do random crazy shit. If we start with an exploitative approach of what my opponent did once, we can justify basically anything, right? Okay, so let's say that I opened the cutoff and my opponent 3-bets the button and I saw him 3-bet Jack 3 offsuit once, okay? So I 4-bet. What do you have? Oh, it doesn't matter because he has Jack 3 offsuit. No, this isn't how you think about strategy at a high level. We try and perform a balanced mixed strategy and focus on trying to perfect our own ranges and make adjustments around the edge. Applying this to other games, we would have the same thought process. When we're faced with a decision, what is the most important thing? And in poker, that's what amount of money has been wagered, what is the action, right? Well, in other games, it might be a little bit different. So like in chess, for example, what was the opponent's last move? How is the position shifted? What is important in my response? Do you want to really know what makes professional players good? It's not the fact that they're geniuses. In fact, a lot of these guys aren't the smartest tools in the shed. But the reason that they're good at poker is because they have gotten this decision-making process down to a science. They don't feel attached to decisions. They don't feel like once they've made a flop decision, they have to do things on the turn of the river. They don't stick to their strategy thick or thin and never change based on what else is out there. Information is present to where they can make a better strategy. They study, they refine, they hone this process. But the thing is, it all boils down to at a fundamental level, when they're faced with a decision, they have a very good way of going step by step through their decision making that results in a solid answer. And that's really what poker ends up being. It's just going to be essentially millions of different decisions that define your career. And if you have just a slight better approach than the next guy, that's a lot of money, right? Because that's the only difference, is the quality of your decision making. This is why whenever I get asked this question, and it happens all the time in the comment section, how do I get better at poker? What do I need to do to improve? Like all of these types of questions, like what should I do with my career, my poker career? What games should I play? All of this type of stuff. What it really boils down to is making better decisions and making consistently good decisions. Think about what are the most important elements and refine that process. Refine, how you approach the game, how you approach answering these questions, and you're going to get better over time. It's all about the fringes, guys. Poker is not really about who makes the most money with aces. And yeah, there's some people that'll play it a little better than others, but really it's not. Everyone wins a lot of money when they get aces on average. But what about when they get 10-9 suited, or they've got a middle pair in a dicey spot, or they've got a hand they might want to bluff with, but they're not sure if they should go for it? What about those spots? Those are the situations that professional players really thrive in, because that way of approaching the game they've always thought about in terms of bet size, range construction, slight exploitative adjustments, results. That type of thought process is going to thrive in those conditions because they're not upset or worried or scared or fearful or angry or emotional or tilted. No, they're just pros. They've been through this a million times, and they'll be through it thousands, if not millions more again, and they've refined this process to be extremely strong. In fact, something I always took solace in when I was playing at high stakes would be if I bet the river or I bluffed the river, I was in a really big spot and I was there and the guy was staring me down, and sometimes it was a little bit scary as they stared me down. I always thought to myself, I believe in my core strategy, and even though this moment is kind of scary on paper, it's a lot of money, and I'm like, dealing with somebody who's good or has reads on me or whatever it is, or thinks they have reads on me or is also very good or whatever it might be, I know my core strategy is very good. I spent a lot of time on it to develop it and to be consistent with it. So thick or thin, win or lose today, I believe in that strategy. And so I'm okay when things go badly, right? Because I believe in the overall thought process that got me here. My poker career, I didn't start with money outside of poker. I made what I had through the game, right? So every dollar that was bluffed or wagered, that was a dollar I earned. And so if I wasn't able to play at a high level, I wouldn't be there to begin with. And so I believed in the strategy. I believed in the concepts that I was putting onto the felt and trying to employ. And if you want to be good at poker these days, you can be, but it's going to take a lot of time. And that's actually something that's changed a lot in the game. It's way more about preparation than it ever was, because you can just so easily see the answers to a lot of these situations. Bots are getting stronger and stronger. Software is improving all the time. There are more training sites, and those training sites offer better products. I mean, look, like, you're going to be up against a lot of other good people that are also trying to win. But you can do it. If you can memorize these strategies and get consistent with your thinking, with your thought process, you can beat the field. It is not unbeatable. Now, you should probably pick your game types well. I'd probably recommend leaning more towards things like tournaments and live cash. But again, it is beatable. You just have to take the time and really learn the way to think. And one day, you can play in the big leagues. I know today's video was a little bit more dry than some other days, but I think that a lot of these concepts are really important, and I just wanted to help out some of the people that are having problems with the way they approach poker and they think about it, and hopefully this helped out a person or two. Anyway, thank you for joining me here today, and again, tomorrow is the last day for the $25 off Upswing discount. If you'd like it, use promo code POKERHANDS or POKERHANDS or whatever you want, and get $25 off an Upswing poker course. All right, guys, see you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining.